So as we get started this morning, as I always like to do, I like to start with a question. Now, I think I know the answer to this one before I even ask, so you can answer out loud if you want to, but I probably wouldn't. So, but it's like actually a simple question, which is that, is there some behavior in your life that you just wish you could stop? We're going to say that's a yes. Yeah, okay, yeah, all right. And also, but it's not in that direction, right? There's something in your life you're trying to start as well, right? That we all struggle with that issue of there's something that we're trying to move away from because we don't think it's healthy for us, or it's just something we don't want in our lives. At the same time, we often have a list of things we want to introduce into our lives that we want to do because we believe those things are healthy. And there's this process that we go through that seems to just repeat itself, that we make the change, and at first it kind of sticks, but before long, it runs out. Kind of the classic one is always, I'm going to start taking better care of myself. I'm going to get up at 4 in the morning every week or every day, and I'm going to go out and work out for 90 minutes, and I'm going to do that 5 days a week, and you make it like 1, 2, 3 days, not even weeks sometimes. Yeah, and I'm not making fun of anybody. I've got a long list of those sort of things myself. And I guess the question is, why does that keep happening? Right? Because in some cases, these are really serious things we're trying to address, right? If your doctor has talked to you and said that, your health is at risk, and if you don't start eating better and start working out, well, it's going to shorten your life. And that's serious. You want to change that. It's the same way stepping away from things. If you're struggling with, alcohol, with drugs, legal or otherwise, moving away from those things would be better for your life, but it's really hard to do. And as much as you want to do it, you can't seem to do it and keep it in your life. Why does that keep happening? What's behind that? Because it's a shared experience, right? I can say this with certainty that every one of us here have dealt with that in some way or another. So why is it like that? Well, that's what I want to talk about. We're kicking off a new series today called "Is It Time for a Change?" And the thing that I find so interesting about this process, and I've shared with you guys, I am a mess. I cover it well, and hopefully I've done enough work along the way to be less of a mess than I once was. But bottom line is that I've told you, I've struggled with anger. I have struggled with overconsumption of all kinds of things. And there's a process, though, that I experienced that changed that. And the thing is that the thing that I find so interesting about the process is that when we're stuck in that cycle of not doing well, where we're trying to move towards something that's healthier for us, or we're trying to move away from something that is bad for us, it can even begin to, we can spend so much time thinking about it and worrying about it, but somehow we still can't move in the direction we want to. And it doesn't even have to be big things. I think I've shared with you guys before that one of the things that I have to be careful about, and it sounds small, but it impacts my life, which means it impacts Bonnie's life, which means it impacts our home, is that I'm a news junkie, right? I can spend way too much time consuming news. And I know that's not good for me. I know that it makes me irritated, it makes me angry, right? And we live in a time where, no matter where you are politically, that it is a stressful time. There are things going on that you don't like, or maybe you like, or maybe you don't, or is it doing this, is it doing that, is inflation going to go up, is it not, all these sort of things. And so I had to finally realize that I was letting that happen again. Although I've been through the process many times, and I would argue have moved away from much more difficult things to move away from. Yet somehow that one keeps grabbing hold of me. And so finally I realized that, I realized what I already know, which is that there's no need for most of us to consume a large quantity of news, right? You can take 10, 15 minutes, generally know what's going on in the world. You probably know what you need to know. There's no reason to spend more time than that for most of us. So I made the decision to make an adjustment to that. So this probably doesn't surprise you, but I'm a person who reads a lot. I'm reading a lot of news. I read a lot for what I do here. There's some topics that I just like to learn about. But one of the things that I really don't do enough of in my life is read just for enjoyment. Like the idea of just sitting down to read something just because I want to read it. Novel, right? But for me, it's always a struggle to do that. So I actually started doing that more recently, and something really amazing happened. Reading the news, which is stress-filled and upsetting, got replaced with reading, for me, fiction in this case, that was relaxing and enjoyable. I'm like, wow, that's actually a possibility. And I always like the way God kind of works in these situations, that as I've been working on this message series, I'm reading a particular book that actually gave me even a quote I can use this morning. Imagine that. And in fact, it's funny. It's the quote actually comes from the Chronicles of Narnia. That one of the things that I've kind of classically missed out on are those kind of really well-known book series. I've just never spent time in them, so I'm trying to kind of work through those. And in Chronicles of Narnia is 7 books. Right, the full series is 7 books. I thought it was 3 when I started. Turns out there's more. But actually, I'm not sad about that at all. In fact, I imagine I will be sad when I get to the end. Now, if you know the series, you know that basically what the books are about is our relationship with Jesus. That they use this fanciful world called Narnia and this really cool lion named Aslan to demonstrate our relationship with Jesus. That Aslan is the metaphor for Jesus. And one of the things that he talks, or an encounter Aslan has in the first book, is with this guy who is this kind of very, very unlikable guy. He's always trying to take advantage of people. He's always very focused on what he can gain from a deal. He's kind of lazy. And as Aslan looks at this guy, Aslan says this. He says, "O Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good." How cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good. So as Aslan describes it, when he says Adam's sons, that's all of humanity. Defending ourselves against all that might do us good. What is he talking about? Well, he's saying what I kind of opened up with, that we have behaviors in our lives, things we're trying to move away from, or healthy things we're trying to move towards, yet we go through a process over and over again of actually taking actions counter to what we say we actually want. That we repeatedly do things that are quite the opposite of what we want. Right? So when we stay in a pattern of self-destructive behavior or self-limiting behavior, Aslan would describe that, right, as defending ourselves from all that might do us good. In the same way, when we're not moving towards something healthy, we want to work out or eat better or spend more time with our family, yet we keep making choices that are counter to that. Aslan would say that in that case, we are defending ourselves from what might do us good. We are actually taking actions, consciously or otherwise, that undermine what we want in our lives. So what is the solution to that? Well, that's what we're going to look at in this series. But the solution can kind of be summed up from kind of one line from the Apostle Paul. Right now, the Apostle Paul is a very prolific part of the Bible. Right, he's a very active preacher in the first century. He's actually a prolific writer in the sense that he wrote more of the New Testament than any other single author. So he preached a lot, he wrote a lot, but he also knows a lot about transformation. Now, Paul says this. He says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Now, what does Paul know about transformation? I said he knows about transformation. What happened in Paul's life? Well, he went from being a person who was actually adamantly opposed to Jesus, to Christianity, right? That he actually worked hard to shut the whole thing down, right? Because Paul comes into the picture in what we call the book of Acts in the New Testament. And the book of Acts documents the period of the first disciples after the resurrection of Jesus. And so Paul kind of walks onto the pages with someone else writing about him, a guy named Luke. And Luke wrote about Paul as someone who actually seethed with hate for Christianity. And so he actively worked to not just shut it down, but to imprison people and to do anything he could to kind of make it stop. And in fact, he was so adamant, he actually gets permission at one point to leave his home city, which is Jerusalem. So now Jerusalem is kind of the center of that initial Christian movement, but it's moving out through the countryside. So in order to shut it down, he gets permission to head to another city called Damascus to actually go out and shut it down there, start doing more arrests, do whatever it takes, break down doors, pull people in. That's what he's setting out to do. But for folks who've been in church for a while, we know that something happens on the road to Damascus. Right, that Paul has this encounter with Jesus that completely transforms his viewpoint. And he goes from being anti-Christianity to, again, being a prolific preacher and writer. And in fact, his transformation, is so significant, the phrase road to Damascus is now kind of a metaphor for any time you go through something in your life that leads to a drastic change. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting that if you read the narrative in the book of Acts about Paul's experience as he leaves Jerusalem, looking to kind of shut down Christianity, goes to this road to Damascus experience, it seems that he, in just a matter of days, he goes from not believing, fighting against Jesus, fighting against Christianity, to having this experience, and what appears to be days later, returns back to Jerusalem now as this big, powerful preacher. Like, in days, all this change happens. And I know for me, as I look at that narrative, I go, I can't change that fast. I don't know how to be suddenly transformed that way. I mean, I've had transformative moments in my life, but I can't just suddenly be that different in a matter of days. But here's where it's really important to understand the difference between what something looks like and what something is. As Luke writes that narrative, he's just kind of summarizing what happened in Paul's life. But Paul did not at all see this as happening instantly in his life. Paul puts it this way. As Paul describes what happened for him after he had this encounter with Jesus and what he did, he then says, I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia and later returned to Damascus. So Paul says, okay, I had that experience and I went into Damascus, but I needed some time. So I started traveling through the countryside, and then I came back to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter and stayed with him 15 days. See, what seems like this immediate transformation was actually a 3-year process for Paul to kind of fully immerse into this new direction. What I describe it as that on that initial trip to Damascus, he has what we call a catalytic moment. Right? A catalytic moment just means that something initiated him to do something different. So in that experience, he went from not believing in the resurrection of Jesus to believing in it. But he was just getting started at that point. He would take years to become the man we know as Paul in the New Testament. So when Paul talks about that idea of, as he says here again, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, Paul understands what that means. He understands that it is something that we go through as a process over time. And so as Paul makes this statement, what he's trying to do is encouraging us to recognize that real change takes time. Right? We can be so hard on ourselves that we just want to be different. We just want this different outcome. We just want something different in our lives, and it doesn't stick. Because maybe we're not giving ourselves enough time to make the change. But also he wants us to understand that it doesn't happen by accident. That real change also takes effort. Now, when we talk about it being effort, it's not that we force ourselves to change. You cannot will yourself into deep change, right? That if you've ever struggled, ever struggled with any kind of substance or difficult behavior, you know you cannot, through willpower, change that behavior. You have to go through a process of change. And Paul is saying is that whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever you're trying to move away from, whatever you're trying to move towards, is going to involve a process. It means we have to invest in ourselves. And so that's the thing that Paul wants us to see, that whether we're trying to get away from something that's really difficult, drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, all those sort of things, or things that seem more normal. Like, do you worry all the time? Or do you struggle with the sense that I want more control over everybody because I'm the one who knows how to do everything right and they've all got it wrong? And we joke about that, but the reality is we all struggle with things like that at different levels. I would say most of us worry more than we want to. Many of us struggle with wanting more control than we can actually have over situations. Well, to make that kind of change is a process. And the same thing towards moving towards healthy things. Again, working out, trying to manage your money better. Even things like daily spiritual principles, like just doing things like setting aside prayer time or reading time every day. Many of us have struggled with that for a long time, that we really want to do it, and we can't find a way to do it. And so what we find is that we're in this kind of stop-start situation. So what Paul is telling us is that we need to go deeper than that. See, here's the problem I have discovered, and I think many people who've been through any kind of transformation process understand. We think the way to change a particular behavior is to try to fix the behavior. Right? If I drink too much, I just need to stop drinking. Right? If I worry too much, I just need to stop worrying. Now, if you've ever struggled with worry, if I say, hey, stop worrying, yeah, works great, right? Works fantastic. Right? It's true with everything, whether we're talking about substance or we'll call everyday things. Same thing if you want to get in better shape. If I say, well, you just need to get up and go in the gym. Stop being so lazy. That's not what fixes it. Right? It's something beyond that. See, the thing is that if we focus on the behavior, we're missing the cause. And that's what Paul is trying to show us. That we need to go deeper. Right? Because remember, he says that we want to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Now, there's a couple key things going on there. First of all, remember that this was not written in English. Right? It was written in Greek. And where it says transformed, the Greek word that gets translated as transformed is also the same word, Greek word, that gives us the English word metamorphosis. Right? What a butterfly goes through after it's been a caterpillar. And so what Paul is describing is this idea of moving from one thing to another through a process to be transformed. He says if you want real transformation, you've got to go through this process. And what does it involve? Renewing our minds. See, the issue that we have when we struggle with not being able to eliminate a behavior from our lives or not being able to consistently incorporate a behavior, it isn't that our willpower is not strong enough. It isn't that we just, can't get past the behavior. The issue is, as Paul describes, in our minds. In other words, it's what's going on inside of us. Now, he says mind. I would say that encapsulates the entire internal being. So that's our brains, also our spirituality. Because what Paul is pointing out here is that what's driving these behavioral problems is the fact that there's something going on inside of us that is causing us to do these things. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because the reason we need a process to transform our behavior is because a process has given each of us the minds we have today, right? The mind that you have, the internal you, the one that no one sees but you have to live with all the time, that version of you has been shaped by the process of your life. Right? Every experience that you have had for your entire lives has shaped what's going on inside of you. Right? Every positive experience has shaped what's going on inside of you. Every negative experience has shaped what's going on inside of you. Every difficult relationship, every painful thing that's happened to you, All those things. Every time someone said something horrible to you, all those things shape what goes on inside of us. And that is the state of our minds. So what Paul is saying is that if you want to have real transformation, you need to renew that. I need to renew that. That we need to go through the process of stripping away those things, getting past that pain and that damage to find what's underneath. Right? Because no matter what you're wrestling with, even if you're doing bad things with your life, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. There's just things that are coming out, they're manifesting that way. And so if we can do the work to get past those behaviors, get past that experience, to find what's going on inside of us, address those issues, we can then come out incredibly differently. So, of course, the question is, what does that process look like? How do we get there? Well, this is kind of funny. I think it is, anyway. I realized that this process is very much like a construction project I had a few years ago. For some of you, you may know, I live in a log home. Have you ever had to refinish a log home? It's as bad as it sounds, just so you know. Excuse me. So I realized that this process of refinishing my log home or bindings in my log home is very much what we're trying to do as we talk about this process. Now, just for context, back in 2019, Bonnie and I bought a 40-year-old log home. First mistake, right? Sort of thing, right? And it was interesting because we knew the home was kind of in bad shape, but we had kind of committed to it. And what we realized is that we first moved in, it was kind of okay, but within a couple years, just how bad the exterior of the home was started to become really obvious. And to make my point, this is what the outside of the house looked like 2 years after we moved in. So you can see all that finish is peeling off and it's tearing away, and it's not really doing the job that it's supposed to do. Right? So what we had to do was address that. Now here's the thing that I want to ask us about. That house, when it was built and they applied that finish, is that what the finish looked like when they first put it on? I wasn't there, but I don't think so. Well, what happened? It was exposed to its environment. The environment had impacted it, right? That everything it had gone through, everything that it had to live through, all that snow, all that rain, all that cold, all that sun, all those things had manifested as exterior damage to the home. Now, even though the outside of that home is in such bad shape, does that make it a bad home? No, if I can just get past the damage and address, kind of start out with what's clean and clear, I can start to address it, and I can start to build it up differently. So what we ended up having to do is kind of make a decision. We had to deal with this problem in one of three ways. At least there may be more, but three I could think of. One is, I could just ignore it and hope it gets better. Right now, that seems ridiculous, right? How many of us struggle with something that we just hope will get better? Right? It's very clear that that's a terrible idea here, but in our lives, we just keep hoping it'll get better. Particularly when we're struggling from moving away from something that's harmful to us. It doesn't get better, right? Hoping it gets better doesn't make it better, right? Hopefully maybe is not a plan, right? So what's my second option? Okay, my second option is that it's peeling, and gosh, some of that wood's really exposed. So what I should do as quickly as I can, run out and buy some new finish and just apply it right away. Put all that brand new finish over this cracked, peeling stuff that's underneath there. Is that a good plan? No, right? Because what's going to happen? The new finish, the change, won't last because what's underneath of it is still problematic. It's still peeling away. But when we try to just willpower our way out of a bad habit or willpower our way into a new healthy practice, what we're doing is we're trying to put the new finish over the damage that's underneath of it. So the third option was to do what? Strip it all away, which is also the hardest one of the choices. but it's also the one that works. So what we had to do was make the decision to have our whole house sandblasted. That's as messy and nasty as it sounds. Because when you have a log home, when you put the logs on top of another, they do have a little groove in there to kind of seat up with one another. But if you take any kind of media and you put it under high pressure, it finds every space and gap and comes inside your house. You literally have plastic on the inside of the walls to keep the outside sandblasting from coming in. And honestly, addressing our issues is messy. And the thing that keeps us locked up in our own unhealthy behaviors is this unwillingness to get messy. That many of us are choosing this option of either hoping it gets better, or more commonly, I'll just put the new stuff over the old and I'll be fine. But the old always seeps through, and it keeps the new from sticking. So we had to do the process of sandblasting it, and once we did that, well, the house looked like that, right? It looked kind of new. There's a lot of sand inside the house after that, but it looked kind of new, right? Because what we've done, we've gotten the damage out of there. We have stripped it away, and we've gotten down to a fresh, clean surface that we can actually work with. Right? And so the healthiness and the beauty of the house was now visible. It was now present with us. And that's what we're trying to do as we address these issues in our lives. Is we want to recognize that what's underneath there is still good. I mean, if you struggle with any kind of significant negative behavior, any kind of addiction or anything that's like that, you do not see yourself as clean and new underneath. You see yourself as the damaged material, what it looked like when everything was peeling. But that's not you. That's what your behavior is leading to. But this exists underneath. And so the invitation that Paul is extending to us, the invitation that Jesus extends to us, is to recognize that goodness is on the inside, but we want to invest in that transformation, to renew our mind, to go through this process, to recognize that it's worth getting into the mess, to get free of the mess, because the only way to get free of the mess is to step into the mess. That's the only way we find what's underneath it there. Now, once we do all that, we could then refinish the home. We could actually put the new stuff down so that now our home looks like that. Right? That it's actually got a fresh finish on it. And notice what it's doing. As opposed to the environment destroying it, it's now a comfortable place to ride out the environment. It's a place that I can be where the environment's on the outside and it doesn't impact the me on the inside. Right? That's the process that Paul is inviting us into. That's the process that leads to transformation in our lives. Now, the thing is that now that we've done that, am I done? No, I got to maintain it. Right? I still have to do work on it, but the maintenance work is way less burdensome than the original work. That once we get to a place where we've got that kind of issue addressed, we've stripped it away, we've done the work, and we've kind of rejuvenated into it, we just have to keep it up. Because if I don't keep it up, what's going to happen? It's going to go just back to the way it was. But again, it's a much lighter touch, a much lighter step. But the key is that what we're trying to do is get down to that healthiness on the inside so that the environment that we are in stays on the outside. You know, and we do that through spiritual practices. We do that, you know, through other practices. I mean, if you are struggling with an addiction of any sort, I cannot encourage you enough to get into a 12-step program. It will make a huge difference. I mean, the things we'll talk about kind of summarize some of that stuff. But if you're really struggling with something, you want to get into a program like that walks you through it. But fundamentally, what we're seeing here is that Paul says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What Paul is trying to get us to understand, what he's trying to get us to see, is that we walk through our lives, right, and the patterns of this world beat on us, and the things that we experience beat on us, and they wear us down, and they can create damage. We all have damage. And Paul is saying the way forward, the way to a path of freedom is to invest in that transformation, to be willing to get messy so that you can get down to what the issues are and move forward. And so basically, if I kind of took the 4 things I did with the house, in our own lives, we can kind of lay them out like this, right? First of all, I talked about understand the nature of the damage. The thing we all need to do, I would encourage us all to do, is think about how the experiences you've had in your life, particularly your most painful experiences, how have they affected you? Who mistreated you when you were young? Right? What relationship have you been in where it was just really painful? What are the sort of things that you had to go through over time that have caused you to put up barriers trying to keep those things out? But of course, if we rely on barriers to keep things out, we have to keep adding more and more barriers. And we keep putting the new over the damaged. So first, understand what those issues are. Right? And then we talk about address the results of the damage of those experiences. In other words, do the work, recognizing that that damage is there, has to be addressed. Do the work to strip it away. The 12 steps do a really good job of walking you through that. But even if you're just going through the process and examining yourself and sitting down with someone you can trust, you can talk about what you've been through and what you're dealing with. That starts to address the damage. And then only after we've done that do we then start to lay down the new finish, right? In other words, introduce the new behaviors, the desirable behaviors, those new things that we want to do in our lives, and begin to reliably move away from the things that have harmed us. And then finally, you got to maintain it. It's not a one and done deal. You need to have people in your life that you can be real with. There's always the joke of, what church do you go to? Oh, I go to the church of everything's fine. All right, people ask you, how are you doing? I'm fine. Everything's good. Yes, I had a huge fight with my wife in the car before I got here, and we're screaming at each other, and we don't agree on anything. I'm fine. Right? We need real relationships in our lives. We need to be with people in our lives that we trust, that we need to connect with people who we can really, really lean on. And when the storms of life hit, don't abandon those relationships. Lean into those relationships. That's what maintains us and keeps us going. And so we want to do that with one another. And, I find that works well when you kind of group up with just a small number of people that you can kind of build that relationship with. In fact, it's interesting. The deepest relationship outside of Bonnie that I have in my life is with 3 other guys who we basically just said, hey, we don't really have anybody in our lives we can talk to. You seem cool. You want to just start meeting once a week. And for 9 years now, we have committed to do that once a week. And we talk about real things. We don't pretend it's all fine. And when we do that, that gives us the strength to go on. It gives us also the clarity to see what's happening in us. And it also, when you build real relationships, gives another person the permission to speak truth to you that you may not want to hear. Those are the things that maintain us and keep us going. So when Paul says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, this is what he's describing, and this is the relationship that Jesus invites us into. So as I wrap up today, we will continue this discussion next week, looking more closely at these issues to see how we really can have this kind of process in our lives and how we can be transformed in it.